Welcome to the Vegan Family Kitchen. My name is Brigitte Gem, and I like to fancy calling myself the priestess of batch cooking. I'm only half joking because we actually meet as a cooking club on Sundays, and I'm not going to church these days, but cooking club is a similar experience. There is a bit of spirituality to it because it's really a moment to focus in the present moment, express gratitude for the wonderful food that we get to prepare, and be together with like-minded people. So I just love doing that. And I have been doing this stuff for about 7 years now in the Vegan Family Kitchen. And what you have maybe is the planned and plant-based 1 week healthy, stress-free vegan meal plan. And this is a small version of what my clients get in my daily life. For real, I cook from the Vegan Family meal plans, and there's also a mini version that's meant for singles and couples. Because when I started the meal plans, I was thinking, families with kids, jobs, all the things. And after a little while, I realized that most of my clients were not vegan and they were not families. And there were lots of people that were basically hacking the meal plans to make them work for 1 or 2 people. And that's how I ended up creating the mini version of the plans, which is basically a lot of the same food, but organized in a way that makes more sense and there's less of it, so that you don't end up with food for a whole month after one batch cooking session. And I am going to do something today. I'm going to aim really hard to keep it within an hour. And that means I did a little bit of advanced work also, because if I try to chop onions at the same time as I talk to people, sometimes I get distracted and I cut a fingernail, or worse, I've chopped some onions, I've preheated the oven, I've cut a little bit of veggies. And what I'm going to do today in this session, so if you've looked at planned and plant-based, it's got a risotto that is made in the oven. We've got some roasted vegetables and a bean soup, curry dressing, cocoa peanut sauce, and those things will go in the blender. And that's it. So why don't I get started? The key here you will see is to have the plans in the right order. So what I'm going to do here is start the risotto. So there's people that don't use oil, and that's perfectly fine. Oh, this is too hot. Sorry, I need to turn this down a bit. It's preheated for too long. So there's people that don't use oil, and I'm perfectly fine with that. I use a tiny amount of oil because I think it makes a real difference. But if I had a heart condition, if I needed to lose weight, if I didn't have kids that have higher fat needs, I would probably use even less oil. But most of my food uses about, 1 or 2 teaspoons of oil, relative to a lot of recipes and cookbooks that will have like 3 tablespoons of oil, which is 9 times more. And that's a little bit crazy. So the one thing I do though, when I cook with very little oil or no oil at all, is that I make sure to add a pinch of salt, not a tablespoon of salt, pinch of salt. And what the salt does is that it breaks down the barriers of the cells that constitute the vegetables, and that makes them sweat more. So they lose more of their water, and so they cook really nicely. And some of that water goes to the bottom of the pan, so it prevents it all from sticking. Something else I'll tell you in a moment, is deglazing. That's really quite important because the deglazing allows us to remove the caramelized bits from the bottom of the pot, because the caramelized bits are really sugars, and the sugars should go in our tummy, not down with the dishwater. And it also makes it all easier to clean. And I realize you don't have an overhead camera here, but again, if you have questions, let me know. But I just put the onion in there, and a big pinch of salt, a tiny bit of olive oil. And I'm gonna add now the garlic. I love garlic. This is really lovely garlic from the farmer's market. If you get your garlic from the grocery store, I mean, it's fine, but try to buy local garlic. There's a lot of garlic imported from China, and it's not great. It doesn't taste like much. You can buy pre-chopped garlic. You can also buy prepared cloves of garlic that you just buy like a big container with like a whole pound worth of garlic. And the unfortunate thing is that it doesn't taste like much. So you need to use 3 times as much. So this is red Russian garlic. I mean, there's lots of different types. But if you use any kind of garlic, it's better than no garlic. I'm sure people in China who grow their own garlic have really tasty garlic. But the stuff that gets exported is not the best, unfortunately. So, and this is not a Michelin restaurant, guys, okay? So I don't have to make it all look pretty and all the same size. These are not huge pieces of garlic. It's not like I'm going to end up with half a clove in my mouth, but it's also not like perfectly minced, all the same size, beautiful. It's home cooking, okay? So it's got to be tasty, it's got to be healthy, it's going to look reasonably okay, but it doesn't have to be perfect. We don't have restaurant critics, although sometimes my kids can be worse. But you know, it has to be made to suit the time we have. And if there's a single tip you take away from here today, is that you don't need to be a perfectionist. In a different workshop, and I think there's a blog post that I have that's called 6 nutritional boosts you can use. There's some advice about that, but in general, I recommend, just like Dr. Greger says, to cut your garlic ahead of time. If you can, like 10 minutes ahead is what you need to do, maybe 20, but not 5 hours. And it allows the chemicals in the garlic that are the most beneficial to our health to develop. So that's awesome. So I've got the garlic in there. I'm going to add thyme. Notice I don't measure stuff. You know, that's about a teaspoon. Crushed between your fingers. There you go. Thyme goes in. Pepper. And I'm going to use a little bit of apple cider vinegar to deglaze the pan. And again, that means removing the brown bits from the bottom. Again, I didn't measure. If you're brand new in the kitchen, well, I'll put a little bit more here. You might need to measure a couple times. And if you do it, pay attention, and then you will know for next time the rough ballpark of how much is a tablespoon, how much is a teaspoon, and so forth. So I'm just going to turn this off now, and I'm going to add the arborio rice. And the rice is getting mixed in with all the nice pieces of onion and garlic. That's my favorite way to make a risotto. I have seriously tested doing it this way and doing it the traditional way of standing in front of the pot and, you know, stirring it and adding a little bit of broth and stirring some more. I can't tell the difference. So your mileage may vary, but I think this makes an awesome risotto. And most of all, it makes risotto on weeknights possible. There is no way I would stand in front of the stove for half an hour, preparing dinner on a weeknight. There's just too much going on and something would end up burning. So I've put in the arborio rice. I'm going to add 5 cups of broth. Another amazing time saver, I use powdered broth. And if you make your own broth, I commend you on your effort. That's awesome. But that's just not something that's possible for me right now. And I'm sure it would be delicious. But I found this brand of broth that is quite awesome. It's tasty. It makes my meals delicious. And it saves me a ton of time. So 5 cups of water. And I'm using hot water. I boiled it earlier. It's not boiling anymore, but that will make the cooking process a little faster. Because if you put cold water in the oven, it's going to take a lot longer to cook your risotto. Okay, so I've got 5 cups of broth. And I'm going to put my water back to boil because I'm going to be making soup in just a moment. And again, I will be using hot broth for the soup. And for the soup, I'll be using the measures on the kettle itself. I'm not going to measure very carefully. How hot is this? It's pretty hot. Very carefully the amount of liquid for the soup because it is soup and I am not a Michelin restaurant. So it just needs to be about the right ratio to work. And so I'm just going to blend this a little further to make sure that there's no rice stuck at the bottom. This is a creuset, Le Creuset dish. I've had it for at least a decade. You're going to be introduced in just a minute to another creuset dish that's been around for about 65 years. And that's my favorite thing to cook with. I cook with all cast iron, animal cast iron like this, and stainless steel. That's pretty much it. I'm not using stick pans on the one hand because I don't like that they end up flaking and all the waste that they're involved in. And there's health implications possibly, but maybe there aren't. But you know what? I can't be bothered. And these will last a lifetime, as you can see. So I'm going to pop this in the oven. If you have any questions, now is a good time to unmute yourself and ask. I'm putting it at the very bottom of the oven up. And normally I would ask my trusty Google Assistant to set a timer, but I had to unplug her to get all the bandwidth. So how long for the risotto? 30 minutes. So let's put a 30-minute timer here. And here we go. So that's the one thing I don't want to forget about, right? Very important. I'll put this back on. I'll just warm up. So here's the big brother, my soup pot. This used to be my aunt's. My mom is the youngest child of 11. And her big sister, the first of 11, had this pot. She unfortunately passed away a year and a half ago, and I inherited the pot, and I could not be more proud to be using it. This pot made a lot of beans over its lifetime, and it just keeps on doing beans without the ham anymore. But I think my aunt would be pretty proud that it keeps on going. So, any questions so far? Yes, go ahead.
What's are you allowed to tell the powder broth? Because that's a good idea. The chicken, or it's not chicken, excuse me, vegan broth.
Yeah, vegetable broth. It's a bouillon, is something else.
Oh, it's like a bouillon. Okay, I know.
Yeah. Organic broth powder en poudre biologique, because I'm in Canada, things are bilingual. So yeah, bouillon cubes, whatever works for you, you know. And a favorite of mine is the bouillon, better than bouillon.
Oh, I have
chicken base. And there's also a better than bouillon beef stock that I use 2 or 3 times a year for more like a Vietnamese soup, a beefy barley soup that I make with seitan, stuff like that. So yeah, it's pretty awesome. Let's keep going. Okay, what's next? Roasting vegetables. So notice there's something that's in the oven for a while. So let's pop something else in the oven, because if you turn on your oven, you want it to be going on for a while. So I'm going to be roasting some vegetables, and these vegetables are going to be part of one of my favorite dishes and my husband's favorite dishes. It's a couscous salad that has roasted cauliflower, roasted carrots, and chickpeas. And now I roast the chickpeas too, but that's because I'm a little crazy. We love chickpeas better. So again, a tiny bit when they're roasted. Again, a tiny bit of olive oil, a little bit more salt than in the previous scenario here. Pepper. So I'm making separate piles of vegetables because my kids love roasted cauliflower, but they don't like roasted carrots. So I don't want to mix those up. Actually, my daughter likes roasted cauliflower. My son will not be caught dead without them. There we go, turmeric. And you notice I use turmeric and pepper together, and the black pepper helps bring out the wholesome stuff from the turmeric. And I need a spoon. Oh, I can use this. There we go. You know what? I'll use a different spoon to mix it up. And I'm going to spread that on a baking sheet that has been lined with parchment paper. That's one of my obvious but favorite hacks, because it just shortens cleaning so much. And the benefit of parchment paper is that it's compostable. So I feel a little bit better about it. My water is boiling, so I'll turn this off. I'm putting in the carrots on one side, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about perfectionism. Okay, you've seen people cut cauliflower carefully, making really pretty little trees, little white trees. That wasn't me. All I do here is that I remove the base. I have it remove the base, pop it in the compost. Ooh. Didn't cut it deep enough. There we go. Okay, remove the dirty leaves. I had rinsed it previously. And is this a Michelin restaurant? It is not a Michelin-starred restaurant. I am not worried about losing my star. And so here's what I do. Pluck, 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 tup, tup, tup. And then some of them need to be cut again. There's my bowl. That's it. Okay, I'm not gonna fuss at making perfect little trees. That is where people get bogged down when they're cooking, trying to make things look really special. When you eat your salad Wednesday night, I promise you will not think, I wish those cauliflowers were cut into pretty little individual trees. No, you're going to be like, oh my God, this is so good. The other benefit of this salad, making it ahead of time, is that it will taste way better on a Wednesday because the flavors will just have improved over time. The dressing flavors will have improved as well. I think it's Wednesday. I don't remember for sure. But whichever day of the week you end up eating this without, within 2, 3, 4 days, it will be just perfect. Okay, let's move this out of the way. So again, and the cauliflower is not looking great, but once it's roasted, nobody will notice. And maybe this is about being less picky. I don't know, but definitely just enjoy high quality food, but cooked for the grade of home cooking. And I think it's all about choosing our priorities, and if you've read my book, Flow in the Kitchen, Practices for Healthy Stress-Free Cooking, I talk a lot about priorities. So you have to decide what's really important for you. And if the size of the cauliflower trees make or break the dinner experience for you, well, by all means, spend a lot of time on that. But for me, what makes or break the dinner experience is that it has to be all vegan, it has to be all plants, except mushrooms. Mushrooms are not plants, they're fungi, but I'm okay with eating mushroom. So it has to be plants, it has to be pretty darn healthy, there has to be a lot of different vegetables in there, and it has to taste good. And so I sacrifice other things like the size of the cauliflower florets. Okay, this one is really big though, so I'm going to cut it. I don't want to have the chunks so big that they're not going to roast properly. So that's the compromise. So again, a little bit of olive oil. That was probably more like 2 teaspoons. I'm going to add some turmeric. And if you use turmeric, which you should, I'm going to give you a trick. When you put in turmeric, you think turmeric, pepper. Okay, so turmeric, pepper. So you never forget, if you're going to use turmeric, to add pepper, because that is how the turmeric gets its nutritional value. If you don't use pepper, it's a bit wasted. Okay, so again, I've got a big bowl here. This is a bit much. We're fitting in I think it'll be fine, my baking sheet. You don't want to have 3 inches deep of vegetables on your baking sheet. It needs to be manageable. And there's going to be more turmeric in that dressing that I'm going to make a little later. Here we go. Okay, and so I'm going to show you. I think you can't quite see from there. Up. So here is my tray of vegetables, just kind of lining that up so it's nicely. I also had cut some onions to add to this, but I don't think there's really space for them. So I'm going to roast them separately after we're done. Popping this in the oven. Any questions? Go ahead. Speak now while I move on to the next task. So I said I would bake the tofu, but my oven is full, so I will bake the tofu later, at the end maybe. So the next step, every prep session needs to have a soup. Soup is awesome for so many reasons. In fact, I always say that soup is part of the solution for most of the problems worth solving in this world, including, of course, climate change and environmental disasters if you were using primarily plants, but even people who eat meat, if they put their meat in soup, well, they're using a lot less than if they're eating a whole steak, right? So using soup as part of your meals is fantastic. It's good for your health in general. You get more liquid, you get more hydrated. There's a lot of nutrients that go in suspension in the broth that you get to absorb. And it's good against loneliness because you can share it with more people. It's just such a wonderful food. I'm a big advocate for soup. So let's make soup. What goes in a soup? And soup, you can use it to also combat food waste in your kitchen. You can always use a soup to just round up everything that's left in your fridge on the end of the week and put it in a soup. And I think every soup needs an onion. If you don't have an onion, don't go to the grocery store to buy an onion, though I have been known to do that. But the onion is the sweet base of the soup. So again, my pot is nice and warm, but not too hot this time. So I have an onion in here. If you're curious about how to chop an onion, because that bogs you down and slows you down, I have a video on YouTube. It's kind of old, but it's a demo of how I chop an onion. And there's also some about carrots and roasted red peppers. And apparently watching those videos has changed some lives. So go figure. Okay. So I've got the onion going here. Okay. So what do we got in there? You know what? I'm going to add, I've added the red onion. I'm going to add right away in this bowl here. I have carrots and celery. So I'm going to put that down in here. It's the triumvirate of good food in many cultures. There's a name for this because it's just the base: celery, carrot, onion. But here's something else you can add to it: kale stems. I remember the first time I read a recipe that had kale when I was just starting to cook with more plants, and the recipe said, you know, remove the leaves from the kale stems and throw them away. I was like, what? That just doesn't work for me. You know, my parents were born after the Depression from parents who had survived the Depression, and they were not going to throw away any edible food, especially not something so healthy as kale. And so I use kale stems in the way that a lot of people would use celery. And I don't know, I've never had a complaint about it. Maybe people are too polite to complain, but I don't think you really notice anymore. So I just line them up like this, cut them really small. And I'm going to add the kale leaves, sorry, at the very end. There you go. So I have all these little cute pieces of kale that are colorful, which indicates that they're good for me. They're real colors from nature. And I'm going to keep my leaves here on the side. So I'll put them in at the end a little bit later. And again, I've used a tiny bit of oil, a nice pinch of salt to help the veggies sweat. And what else do we want in a soup? Zucchini, that's always a good idea. Pop. Zucchini. And we're going to let every vegetable cook for a minute or two before moving on. See, I mean, it's only been about 26 minutes and I've got roasting vegetables. I've got a risotto on the go and I've got a soup that's basically halfway done. So that's not too bad. Roasting, any tips for managing timing on different vegetables? For things like broccolini that are not even in size, I'm having trouble with some stuff undercooked and some stuff overcooked. So with all due respect, I don't understand why anybody would want to roast broccolini. I find it really strange. I know some restaurants do that, even roasting broccoli. I do it once or twice a year, but it's really not my favorite thing to eat. I don't think it's a suitable vegetable for roasting. I think it needs a lot of steam. I think it gets really sweet and it's bright green. And I don't think it improves when it goes in the oven. So personally, I don't roast those, so I don't have answers for that. For the other vegetables, I cut them about all the same size. Tiny bit of oil, a little bit of salt that will make it sweat again, same kind of process. And that's it. Sorry, adding the red pepper. And the beautiful thing about cooking plants compared to cooking fish or other kinds of meat is that it's so forgiving. As long as you keep an eye on it. I mean, I'm not going to let this go for an hour without paying attention. But when I was cooking fish, you had to be on the ball. You know, you have to look, if you're cooking, I don't know, a halibut or a salmon, it's really good at, I don't know, let's say 12 minutes or 15 minutes. And if you overcook it by 2 minutes, you've really wasted it, right? Not so for carrots, cauliflower, chickpeas, or anything else you might put in the oven that's vegan. Seitan even, if you're roasting seitan, if you're roasting anything vegan, you have a lot of margin of error. And so, yeah, broccolini, just don't roast it, is my piece of advice. I would steam it, and other vegetables, chop them about the right size, monitor, you know, and keep the light on in the oven, have a look once in a while. If it looks like some of them are burning, then that's another benefit of having sections on your baking sheet. that you can remove. So just because you're asking, I'm gonna go check what's going on in here. And I can't see, it's fine. So there's going to be some pieces of cauliflower that will be more golden, some others will be less golden. I could take it out and shake things up to make sure that they're all even. But again, this is my kitchen, not the Michelin star restaurant. Every piece of cauliflower will be cooked. The tiny pieces will be a little bit more caramelized. The bigger pieces a bit less so, but everything will be quite lovely to eat. Yeah, try steaming. That's awesome. Okay, so we've got the soup on the go here. I've got the red pepper in. If you cook with very little oil or no oil, there's something that you're going to do differently is the handling of garlic. In the vast majority of recipes, especially Italian recipes, but also Indian food, garlic is the first, second, or third ingredient you're going to see. So you add typically a lot of oil, and when it's hot, you add the garlic, and the garlic infuses the oil with its flavor, which I gotta say is delicious. So when once in a while my husband cooks and he follows recipes, he loves following vegan richa recipes. And so he makes these, Indian curries or something. And so he does the infusion of the oil at the beginning with the chilies as well and a bit of ginger maybe. It's really delicious, but it's a lot of oil. It's a trade-off. So if you cook like me with less oil, you don't want to put in the garlic at the very beginning because it's going to burn. And then it loses its nutritional properties and its flavor alike. And it can even get kind of bitter. And I really don't like that. So personally, I add the garlic generally towards the end of the cooking of the other vegetables, just before I deglaze the plate. And again, reminding you, what is deglazing? Deglazing means throwing in a liquid that's, we always say cold liquid, but I've been experimenting and I don't think it makes a huge difference. So adding a liquid, maybe a quarter cup, no more than a half cup of liquid to the bottom of your pan. There we go. And it helps. At the same time, you scrape. This is my favorite instrument because it has a flat line here, so you can effectively scrape. You can think of it like a curling game for those who are curling fans. I'm not a curling fan, but you get the picture. And so you remove the caramelized bit from the bottom. That way you don't have to scrape when you're at the washing time. And again, the sugars go inside your tummy. So how you doing in here? There's actually nothing sticking at all in here. And you probably saw that I didn't put a lot of olive oil. I did put a pinch of salt or two, but nothing exciting. So I'm going to add the garlic. Am I forgetting something? No. So garlic, some herbs. I'm going to add thyme here again. Another plug here for this cutting board. Having a good cutting board and a good knife, that's way more important than anything else. The cutting board, it's awesome because it's light. It's wood. This is Hinoki wood. It's actually from Muji, of all places. It was $30 when I bought it. They don't sell it in Canada anymore, I think, but they have it in the States. If you have an IKEA store, they have pretty decent wood cutting boards. But again, you want to go for light and just a little bit bigger than a piece of paper. See? Let's have a look. Yeah, it's like more like a legal piece of paper. And that way I can lift it and I can scrape things off with the blunt side of my knife. So back to my garlic in here. Anyone has questions? Go ahead.
You have a favorite knife? I need a new one.
So currently my favorite is a Wusthof knife. There's basically two big categories of knives, the Japanese knives and the German knives. So Wusthof, as you can guess, is German. This is right for me. I'll show you a couple others since we have a moment. Other stuff we use. I'll show you what I don't like. And I'll show you something funny. My mother never had another knife than this. And she cooked thousands, tens of thousands of meals. And she likes to work with a paring knife. I don't get it, but that's her favorite thing. And good for her. That's why I have one at home in case my mom comes over. This is a Japanese knife. And a lot of Japanese knives have a really sharp I don't want to say bolster. I can't remember the name of this little part here. And I can't get used to it. I bought this out of curiosity. We use this sometimes to prepare like fruit snacks for the kids, but personally, I have a hard time working with it. What I had before, so I have this other Woo Stuff it's not a Santoku because Santokus have a slanted bit here. I can't remember the technical name for this. I quite like it, but I found that I like having the pointy end to core things just to be able to poke things. But before I had this knife, like a year ago, I've been cooking for about 15 years. Actually, that was a wedding gift. We had a set of Henkel's knives, and they were not the expensive Henkel's, and that worked really well for me. That was one of my favorites. And then when we were on a trip, because when you go on a plane, you can't bring your own knife if you only have carry-on. So I bought this at like a grocery store in Hawaii at some point, and we actually use it a lot. The key is to keep them sharp, so it doesn't stay sharp for very long, or really I don't know, because I prefer a heftier knife, but not too heavy, because I'm muscular, but not so muscular, I guess. So your mileage may vary. Does that answer your question, Karen?
Yeah, thank you. That gives me some good things to look into.
Yeah, I like the Woo Stuff. Global makes good knives, and I'm an IKEA fan. I can't hide it. IKEA makes a really good knife. It's about 50 bucks. You know, this Woo Stuff knife is 120 Canadian, maybe. So probably sells for $100 in the US. The IKEA equivalent knife is about $50 Canadian. So I'm guessing it's selling for $34.99 US. And it's really awesome. And I would definitely have one if I didn't already have this. And I have to stop myself every time I go to IKEA not to buy one and thinking, you know, just in case. But I store my knives. Also important, you store your knives safely and in a way that preserves the edges. So mine are on a knife strip on the wall, so they don't constantly bang against each other. You don't leave them wet. So I've got the base for my soup here, and I did not yet add the thyme. So let's add a little thyme. I don't know, the recipe says probably a teaspoon, is that right? Yeah, teaspoon thyme, eyeballing it. So one thing you can do, if you don't feel very secure with eyeballing, I'll show you the slow way. So you take your measuring spoon, you measure 1 teaspoon, and then you put it in your hand and you're like, oh, this is what 1 teaspoon is, right? And now you have a good feel for it. You can do that a couple times. And I'm just squishing them a bit to help them release their flavor. And I will add some more pepper. At the same time, because I don't have ready-made broth, I'm going to add my broth powder. What do I see here? 6 cups broth. So this one is 1 teaspoon for 2 cups of broth. I mean, I could put less, I could put more, depending on my needs on a given day. And what else do we need? Apple cider vinegar. So I'm going to use the apple cider vinegar here to deglaze. There's not much to deglaze, really, but it also adds a bit of brightness to the dish. You could also use lemon juice, which has the extra benefit of helping more with iron absorption. You don't want to put too much. You don't want your soup to taste like vinegar, but it does make a difference in taste, I find. And what else do we need? I'm going to turn the heat off. We need the vegetable broth, so I'm going to add 6 cups of water, and that's based on the 6 cups, measurement on the side of my kettle. Making soup is not an exact science. The point is to get your vegetables and your beans in. What else is in this? 1 can of cannellini beans. So I get my groceries on foot. I don't like to carry heavy things. So if you get canned beans, they're super heavy because they're mostly water. So for that reason, primarily, that's why I cook my own beans at home in my Instant Pot. And so I just cooked these this morning. The side benefit is that they taste so good when they're fresh. After that, they just taste the same as normal beans. But when they're just out of the Instant Pot, freshly cooked, you just take a tiny, a little bowl of beans with a sprinkle of salt and maybe like 3 drops of olive oil. And it's the most amazing snack. So a can of beans is about 1.5 cups, which is 6 1/4 cups. I think that's about right. And I'll add one for good luck because I think I had a bit more water. And I'm going to stir my soup and just let it simmer. And this will be good to eat as my lunch when I'm finished with this workshop. But really, it's going to be better tomorrow. And it will be a perfect lunch. My daughter loves having soups for lunch now. Where's the lid? There it is. I'm just going to put the lid on to bring this. I had turned it off, but actually, you know what? I'm going to bring this to my actual stove. Oh, here we go. And I'll put it here to finish cooking just so I can free the space over there. Okay, so here we go. Any questions? Oh, I'll just add the kale. You can add the kale closer to the end, but I want my cutting board. So adding the kale closer to the end would increase marginally the vitamin content. But if it's leaching vitamins, it's going to leach the vitamins into the broth of the soup. So really, it does not matter a great deal. And it's more important for me to have fewer dishes and not to have to pull out another cutting board. So I'm just going to pop this in. So see, if I put the lid down, I'm careful not to, throw it so I don't scrape the top, but I'm not overly careful. There we go. Okay. Any questions? So far, so good. And my vegetables timer has gone off. Oh, that was not for the vegetables. Was it for the vegetables? No, it was for the risotto. And the problem with cooking with glasses is that then you can't see it. Okay. Here we go. Risotto. Well, the timing is excellent. I will hereby demonstrate what to do with the risotto. Okay, so I could have been standing in front of the stove with my spoon and the risotto for a long time, but I did not. I roasted vegetables, I prepared soup, and now I'm going to turn this into a risotto. So I'm going to take the lid off, put it over here, take my wooden spoon, try to show you here. I hope you can see. This is what I have. So it's not quite a risotto, it's still quite soupy. And I'm just going to stir. And I'm not going to stir for the full 5 minutes. It's now 45 because it's a little boring for you, but I'll stir for a solid 3 minutes while I talk about other things. And that will make it a lot creamier and absolutely delicious. There was something else to this risotto that I feel like I'm forgetting. Nutritional yeast. Yeah, so if you like, so first of all, risotto does not have to have cheese. And I think because in North America, we always feel like we need to add cheese to everything. There's a lot of places where they will add Parmesan cheese in particular, which by the way is not even vegetarian because it has animal parts in it. But you don't have to. The nature of risotto is not to have cheese, but you can add a little bit of depth of flavor by adding a tiny bit of nutritional yeast. And I'm gonna do that because I brought it out. Some people eat nutritional yeast by the spoon. That is not the case for me, but I like having a little bit of it. It's also good for us. So I've got about 2 tablespoons, not even that much, about 1 tablespoon nutritional yeast here. I'm adding it in. And the recipe calls for green peas. And I was absolutely certain I had some, but I didn't. So when we eat it, I will add the peas after the fact, and that will be in a couple of days. And there is also supposed to be spinach in here. And I don't have spinach, but I have kale. So as soon as I've done a good stir, actually, you know what? So it's been a minute. So once I've stirred for 2 minutes, I will set it aside. I will chop a few leaves of kale and I will pop them in instead of the spinach. I will cut them really small so that they don't feel too fibrous, number one. And number two, they're just gonna finish cooking because believe it or not, I'm sure you believe me, this is really hot. Okay, so if you keep going, it will just get creamier and creamier. I'll show you again. It's getting quite a bit more creamy here. So I'm just going to put it aside here. Remember, the lid is hot. I'm going to cut a couple of leaves of kale, and I will use the stems in something else after. Here we go. You know, you shouldn't obsess about saving the stems. If you can, why not, right? There's any questions? Oh, I see something in the chat there. How do you reheat the, I will assume that you're talking about the risotto, is that correct? Please let me know. Well, I'll answer the question about the risotto. The risotto for us is often a dish that we actually reheat in individual portions. You could put it on the stovetop and add about a cup of broth to reheat it. That would be one good way to do it. But for us, it tends to be the meal that we have when we all eat at different times or we're pretty busy. So in that case, we just reheat individual portions in the microwave. Now I have my kale, so I'm just going to add that here. But yeah, you can, if you're going to do it on the stovetop, you can absolutely do it, but you'll probably need to add a little bit more liquid to help the process along, because otherwise it's going to probably burn at the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to move this, it's still too hot, move this down here and stir it some more. You know, one trick my mom has is that she would put this in the sink to stir it so that it doesn't make a mess, number one, but also it's lower, which makes it easier for people who are not too tall. My mom is a little shorter than me, so she likes doing that. But yeah, so see, I'm just going to stir it for another few seconds, and then I'm going to move on. So it's going to get only creamier as it sits, and in probably an hour, I'm going to transfer it to some glass Tupperware style, you know, containers, also from IKEA. Okay, so last two things that I'm going to do for now is two things that go in the blender. And again, this is the demonstration of how a little bit of planning ahead makes such a big difference. Because, so number one, I'm going to use my little Vitamix jar right here and put this on the side. And I'm going to pop this stuff in, then remove it. And then I'm going to use the Vitamix again for the coconut sauce. And that will be how I don't need to clean it because the ingredients somewhat overlap. Okay, so lemon juice from one lemon. Here's another demonstration. So I've cleaned the lemon earlier. And what I'm gonna do is not juice the lemon in this case. So I'm lazy, number one. And number two, I paid for the whole lemon. So why would I throw most of it away, including the delicious fiber? So I'm just removing the skin. If I had more time today, I would dehydrate the lemon skins, the lemon rinds, but I don't. So I'm just checking that there's no seeds. This is going to be a power seed. There's a little seed here, so let's take it out. So I would dehydrate the skins to make lemon tea. And that's going to be a lot of lemon already, but that's okay. So I might end up with a bit more dressing than what the recipe officially says. So that way I'm keeping the fiber from the lemon, not just the juice. The juice is lovely, of course, but why stop there when you can get the full thing? There we go. A little more. I think there's a... And also it makes use of what I have. So one less thing to clean. Okay, my hands are sticky now. Okay, lemon juice, olive oil. So this recipe, it's a dressing. I suggest a 1/4 cup olive oil, but again, you could use less by putting some water instead. But I already got the juicy lemon in there. For once, I'm using the full amount of olive oil. I think it's also another skill there to know when does olive oil make a big difference. And I think this is a case where it will, but you don't have to. You could use something else. 3 cloves garlic. 1, 2. Actually, I'll just use 2 because I need the other one in the next recipe. A chunk of ginger. So I have this ginger here that's organic ginger, and it's a lot more potent than conventional ginger. So I've just washed it, brushed it, and I am not going to remove the skin. It is absolutely not necessary. Another habit that was invented by people that sell gadgets or have Michelin star restaurants, but that's not me. And we're going to add cumin, coriander, turmeric, cinnamon. Maybe a little bit more here. How's the soup doing? Should bring it to a boil. Cumin, coriander, and cinnamon. If you end up subscribing to the meal plans, which by the way, you can use coupon code, what did I call it? You're going to get it after, but I created a coupon code that gives you 30% off if you attend this session. So if you subscribe to the meal plan, you're going to discover that I love cumin and I use a lot of it. So the base amount of cumin is a tablespoon, but if you don't like cumin, you know what? Use less. It's totally a personal choice. So cinnamon, half a teaspoon. Cinnamon is actually really good for us, but make sure to use real cinnamon. There is a surprising amount of not real cinnamon going around. This is just starting to drip. And turmeric, of course, every opportunity you have to add turmeric to your life, go ahead, because it's such a powerful drug almost. And cayenne pepper. So I'm going to use just, instead of cayenne here, I'm going to use a dash of Tabasco sauce, and that will be that. There we go. And I'm going to blend this. And this is Zoom. And the beautiful thing about Zoom is that I think you're not going to hear my blender. Think of making space for it. Here we go. So the Vitamix blender is the ultimate vegan enabler. It's such an awesome appliance. Good knife, good cutting board, and then the Vitamix blender or a Blendtec, I suppose. Let's try to blend this. Here we go. Got the dressing done. And it's probably a little bit too lemony, I can tell without even tasting it. So I'm going to add, yeah, it's very thick because of all the fiber in the lemon. So I'm going to add a quarter, more like 3 tablespoons water. Here we go. Just blend for another 10 seconds. Pro tip, when you use a blender, you must know that already, but always put your hand on top, just in case. Do not ask me how I know that or why there's beet stains on my ceiling. Okay, here's the dressing. It's nice and thick. So the next recipe that goes in the blender is the cocoa peanut noodle sauce. And it uses a lot of the same ingredients. So I'm not going to spend the next 10 minutes trying to scrape the blender clean. I'm just going to add ingredients to this. So here's my sauce. And where's the list of ingredients? Here it is. There we go, cocoa peanut sauce. So garlic. So I should have 3 cloves garlic, but I don't know where the rest of my garlic went. So it will be that for now. I will add a piece of ginger. Let's say this. So a bit of ginger. I'm removing the, super dry bits because they're not appealing. But I'm again not peeling the ginger. There's this lady who is a Sri Lankan mom who was giving Indian cooking lessons, who taught me that actually the ginger skins are really good for us and help activate the rest of the ginger. So what the heck, it saves me time. Okay, so lime juice. I'm going to do the same trick here as I did for the lemon by just peeling the lime and putting it in. You can use lime juice. I've occasionally purchased lime juice ready-made from the store, and that is fine. Okay, here we go. I've put half a lime because I think it will be pretty limey otherwise. And there's supposed to be soy sauce in there, peanut butter. So what I'm going to do instead of peanut butter is put a handful of peanuts. My soup is boiling. Peanuts Ooh, my husband has eaten all the peanuts, so I will be using peanut butter and soy sauce. Here's the soy sauce. So normally I would be just putting in a handful of peanuts because the peanut butter is what we buy for toast, but the Vitamix is pretty good. So peanut butter, it says here 3 tablespoons. I'm going to eyeball that. There we go. That's probably about 3 tablespoons. And in private, I will lick the spoon later. And here we're going to add the soy sauce, a 1/4 cup. I had a 1/4 cup. There it is. The recipe says maple syrup, and that's delicious. I come from Quebec, so I love my maple syrup. But you know what? I'm going to do something different in the same spirit as using the whole lime. I'm just going to put in a couple of dates. And the dates I use are pre-pitted. They're not those huge medjool dates. They're quite a bit smaller. I like them. And though they are pre-pitted, I just kind of break them like this with my fingers just to be safe. Because if there was a pit in them, it would kind of ruin. Pits can be pretty bitter, so it would kind of ruin the sauce. And salt, a little bit of salt. I'm not going to put hot sauce in this because my kids are going to eat it, but I will use coconut milk. And this is a rare indulgence in the meal plan. You don't see a whole lot of coconut milk. Don't do this with your knife. Your knife doesn't like it. So you don't see a whole lot of coconut milk because I try not to emphasize saturated fats unnecessarily. But once in a while, it makes for a really decadent dish. And these noodles, if you do decide to follow suit and make this dish for yourself, these noodles are very saucy. Okay, so using the whole can of coconut milk is not something that's really typical in my cooking, but it makes for a really saucy dish that's kind of like restaurant level noodles, and I love it. Let's blend it. And I'm going to scrape the sides because that's the downside of using the actual peanut butter as opposed to, is that the peanut butter kind of stuck to the sides here. All right, let's scrape the top. Just reblend for a minute. And the cocoa peanut noodle sauce is here. If you have things in your fridge like tamarind paste or Chinese fermented tofu, something, a fermented bean paste, which is basically a stinky tofu, you can use that as well. And it adds a really deep flavor to your dish, and it's quite lovely. And I'm going to use that mason jar here, and that way I can probably scrape in the rest of the peanut butter later and give it a good shake by hand. And that's it. Let's see how things are going. Vegetables. So, can't see you, but I hope you can see me. We have a risotto. We have a sheet of, I gotta say, perfectly roasted vegetables here. We have a soup. Let's see how the soup is doing. The key will be to wait until, there you go. So I'm not gonna bring it to you because it's really heavy and really hot, but the soup is ready. It's maybe a little bit on the thin side. So I might add a little bit of lentils to thicken it out if I have time, but I don't have to. It depends how you like your soup, more thin, more thick. What else do I have? I have the cocoa peanut noodle sauce, the risotto we've talked about, and I don't know where my orange sauce went. That's embarrassing. Here it is. And I did that in an hour, which I think is pretty cool. So I'm totally open for questions now. If you want to hang out for a few minutes, I wish I could share this food for you because there's too much for me. I'll need to clean up. My assistant did not come to clean up. That's unfortunate. And I want to remind you that if you try this and it works for you, you may like the vegan meal plans. You can subscribe. You can use that coupon. It will end up being like $86, I think, for a lifetime subscription. You get a year's worth of dinner recipes. And after 3 months, you start to realize that your cooking skills have improved a lot. And I like to think of the meal plans as a 1 year, very practical, hands-on, home-approved cooking course, because you learn the major forms of cooking. You learn how to make soup, you learn how to make stir fries, things like risottos, different sauces. So love it. If that works for you, that's great. It's not for everybody. If you're more of the DIY style, I have a course called the 5,000 Meal Solution. You probably have received the link by now. So check it out. Maybe it's useful. And it's a course I created when my business was called Smart Vegan Kitchen. So it's heavily discounted already. And it's useful to a lot of people to learn the basis of meal planning. And there's a meal plan you can try in there that covers, I think, 28 days. So 4 weeks worth of dinners. And that's it for today. So if there's more questions, I see the chat is moving. Thank you so much. Well, you are welcome, Becky. Yes, go ahead.
I have a question. I have to run. I'm at work, but I wanted to ask you about the cooking club on Sundays.
Yeah. What do you need to know?
When is it? How often? What kind of recipes do you do? What's
So
the
we follow the
cost?
meal plans roughly, but some people just do their own thing. So I don't know if Karen is still here, but Karen usually cooks her own food as long as it's plant-based and I don't see meat on the screen. It's all good. But most people follow some version of the meal plans. We meet on every other week. So there's a meeting this coming Sunday, and every other Sunday it's 2 p.m. Pacific time. And it's always a small group. There's a bunch of people signed up, but not everybody can come all the time. But it's just really nice camaraderie. And it's not a class, like it's not like this. It's really me cooking and you cooking, and we chit chat. Of course, I'm there to answer questions. But yeah, and you can try it out for 3 months by signing up at that link I sent you. So you get the meal plans and the Zoom link to be part of the cooking club.
Okay.
Does that answer the question? Yeah.
Yes. All right. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for coming. Cooking club rocks, Karen says. Yeah, you commit for a time. It's kind of like going to the gym, you know that people are going to be waiting for you and you wait for them and you support each other. It's just really nice community to have. And honestly, like, again, like people sometimes think that I'm, some kind of superhuman with really good habits, but it only works because I have accountability. And knowing that there's people that are going to show up, I'm like, well, I guess I gotta go. And I go. And it makes a world of difference in my week, having just these building blocks ready-made. Any other questions?
No, but I just wanted to say thank you. I thought that was awesome. I was like, you cooked, I can't believe how many meals you cooked in like an hour. Like, that's so great.
It's
So good.
like, I spent 20 minutes chopping beforehand.
Yeah.
Because, I'm talking, and as you can see, I can be a bit distracted.
Yeah.
But even if I didn't, like, it would have taken about an hour and a half. And it's not because I'm a super good cook. It's because I've adjusted my standards to not be too much of a perfectionist, and I'm doing the things in the right order. Like, imagine if I had started with the dressings, then I would be finishing. It's like, oh, now I have to wait an hour for the vegetables and the other stuff to be ready, right? So putting things in order is really key. And so, the average person, when they do this for the first time, maybe it takes them 2 hours, not like 65 minutes. But once you practice quite a bit, and if you have a decent plan to follow, it can be quite a bit faster.
No, that's brilliant. I love the cauliflower because I am one of those people that does the flora, and I'm like, okay, fine, I'm just going to chop it now. That's it.
If that's the only thing I achieved today, I'm really glad I was here and that you were there and that you had that thing you learned, and it will make your life so much better.
Yeah, and I have your book. I bought your book, so it was brilliant.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, now you got to read it.
Thank you.
That's the downside of books. They don't sometimes I try to hold them, and I hope that by osmosis they'll come in, but no, you got to read them. But someday maybe I'll do an audiobook.
Ages ago, I bought it online, and I read it online, and it was great. Good.
Thank you. Don't hesitate to leave a review on Amazon. It makes a world of difference in helping more people find out that you don't have to chop cauliflower in knife blades.
That's right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for being here. I'm going to say bye now, and I really appreciate that everyone was here. And if you have more questions, and there's a feedback form that you're going to get by email, so please don't forget to fill that.
Thank you so much. You're wonderful. This was great.
My pleasure. Thank you for being here. Take care.